I'm Dr. Deb Butler, and you are listening to Thinner Peace in Menopause and Beyond. This is episode number 428. Welcome to Thinner Peace in Menopause and Beyond. This is Dr. Deb Butler, Master Life and Weight Coach, and as always, your coach. If you're a woman and you're smart and you're successful and you've been struggling with weight your whole life, and now menopause is making it harder than ever, and you are ready to make this the last time you ever have to go on a diet again, then this podcast is for you. Stay tuned. Well, hello, all my dear friends all over the world. It's summer. And I don't know about you, but here in the Midwest, it's starting to get hot. So my schedule is starting to change because I create schedules for myself based on the things that I like to do and the things that I think I need to do and what my schedule says, how I create my schedule. And I know everybody's a little bit different in terms of if they work or what they're doing. But in the end, I really love the idea of prioritizing what my needs are first. And one of those needs for me is that I need to get out and move my body, and I need to be outside, and I need to be in the woods. And I could say need, or I could say want. And I guess in reality, I don't need it, but I really want it, and I want to make sure that I get it. And I learned a long time ago that the things that help me be the most available for anything else that I want to do in life, be it for a person or a career or anything, is that I need to be filled up first. And probably for all 427 podcasts, I've been saying something like this. And one of the things that for sure I've learned is that if I leave myself out, and I expect more from myself and not fill myself up, it's a lot harder to do. So, after being in this world for 71 years, this is one of the lessons that I know for sure is I want to move my body, I need to be outside, and I love to be in the woods. Need or want, doesn't really matter. It's just something that's going to get done. It's a commitment to myself. I learned how to make commitments over time. I love to teach you how to honor your own commitments and realize that some of you put yourself down when you don't honor your commitments. So those commitments need to be more on the easy side than the hard side. So for instance, for moving the body, or if you want to call it exercising, or what I like to call it playing, because I like to go out and play in the woods. If that's what you like, then you need to figure out how to get it done. And sometimes what our brains will tell us and what sometimes social media will tell us or a certain person will tell us is you need to do it for so long in order for something to happen. And sometimes that's just a lot more than what you and I are doing. And if we try to aspire to something that sounds too hard to our brains, we're going to tend to say we're going to do it, and then we're not going to do it, and then we're going to beat ourselves up, and it's going to be a cycle. So here is my recommendation for honoring your commitments and making commitments. And let's just talk about exercise or play. So most of the time, I usually go out. Well, I'm not going to tell you how long I go out. What I want to tell you, because I don't want you to thinking you need to do what I do. I want to tell you what I've created for my clients and myself over learning how to honor my own commitments is to make sure that I make them easier and not harder. So for instance, for my walking, I just make sure that I get 20 minutes done. It's a 20-minute minimum that I call it for myself. And in the beginning, that meant 10 minutes in and 10 minutes out. If that's all I was willing to do, or if that sounded the easiest to me, then that's what I was going to tell myself. And I also knew that I would be so much better off with 20 minutes than nothing. And that's the way that I started this thing that I think that I need. and that I say that I love, it started with tiny little commitments or the minimums. And I'm sure you've heard it in many different ways, but starting here, starting this summer, why don't you decide right now what it is that you want to commit to for the next week and make sure it's easy and it's minimal. So for instance, even if it's something like eating, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to eat between the twos for the rest of my life, that sounds good. I would rather you say to yourself, for the next meal, I am going to eat between the twos and see what I find out, or see if I can discover what my twos are, or see if I can discover what my numbers are. Or maybe the commitment is as simple as at the next meal, I'm going to make numbers according to my hunger and find out what it feels like to be a little hungry or a lot hungry or a little full or a lot full, and start putting numbers to it, meal by meal, not for the rest of your life, because your brain will go, "Wah!" and it won't want to do anything. And our brains are what I always talk about, because our brains don't run us unless we let our brains run us. We are the managers of our brains and of our minds because we have a prefrontal cortex, and we can call that the observer. Call it whatever you want. Smart part of our brain knows. Okay, so just that on exercise and play and the minimums. That's not really what I'm talking about today, but it is the beginning of this podcast because it's summer. I'm getting ready to change my schedule because I need to get out a lot earlier in order to be able to get that woods, the outside, the movement in my body. I can't wait. It gets too hot. Guess what? The older I get, the less I like the heat, the less I like the sun. I don't like it on me as much. It doesn't feel as good. 20 or 30 years ago, I loved it. We change as we get older. We need to be aware of those changes, and we need to be flexible about those changes. Which kind of brings me to what I'm actually talking about today. And I'm excited about it because I got a letter from a listener. And I love it when you write me and tell me what's going on for you or what might be problematic for you. Sometimes I will answer it back personally. Sometimes I will answer it on the podcast if I think a lot of you have the same problem or the same challenge. So in this case, I think that the listener that sent this letter, I think a lot of you will relate to it. And I think it's great to hear from a real person who's probably just like you. I know she sounds a little bit like me 20 years ago, 30 years ago, before I understood all the things that I teach now about our bodies and being at peace with food. So I'm going to read you her letter first. And I want you to know that if you send me a letter, I will ask your permission to read it. I won't just read it without asking you. And I'm going to go ahead. She sent me another letter saying it was okay to use it. So I'm going to read her letter to you. And I'm also going to read a little bit of a response she sent when she told me that it was okay to use her letter. So this is what she says. Hi, Dr. Deb. I just finished listening to episode number 1 of your podcast, and I'm intrigued, but also already feeling a little discouraged because my work schedule doesn't necessarily allow me to simply listen to my body and respond. I want to follow the podcast weekly, i.e. not binge, but I'm thrown off by this concept, and I'm hoping you can offer some clarity. She goes on to say a little bit about me. I'm 53. I'm in perimenopause. I'd say I've been having real symptoms for about 2 years. I'm around 10 pounds heavier than I've ever been and 20 pounds heavier than I ultimately would like to be. 10 years ago, I was in amazing shape, great vitality, and I don't remember any of it being particularly intentional. Or rather, my impulses were in pretty darn healthy state. I got a Fitbit in 2018, had fun being bossed around by it, and reporting to it for about a year or so. I loved how much more aware I was of my food and exercise behaviors. I think a combination of pandemic and perimenopause have really impacted that flow. I am hopeful that listening to your podcast will help me shift into making some necessary changes. and hope you can help me get past the initial hurdle that I mentioned at the beginning of this novel. Thank you. Okay, this is what intrigues me about her letter. Number one is I get a lot of questions in letters about what if I have a job or what if I have something where I can't eat when my body is a -2? And what do I do about that? And this is what I want to say. And it's going to be a pretty simple answer. And I use this with my clients all the time too, is number one, first, it's okay. Sometimes you can't, and that's okay. If you can't because of your job, I don't want that to mean that you have to stop listening to your body forever because at certain times of the day, you can't. But this is what I want you to think about. I doubt that's the reason why you've gained this weight. I doubt it. I think probably the reason that you gained this weight is more because when you are not in a scheduled time when you're working, I'm assuming you mean working, but I don't know for sure. But a lot of people will tell me that their jobs have certain times where they eat or they can't eat or whatever that is. And I think number one, it's really good just to start being aware at your job what those numbers are, when it's time to eat, when you feel that -2. And if you find that you have to go below it before it's time to eat, that may or may not be a problem. But for sure, if you're eating before you're hungry, let's say you're at a 0 and it's a break and it's time to eat, what do? I say you just do your best. You do your best knowing what your body signals are. And listen, if you're not hungry, you don't have to eat. And what your brain may say, I'm sure, is, oh my gosh, well, what's going to happen in 2 or 3 or 4 hours if I don't eat now? And I say, I think that would be interesting just to find out, unless there's absolutely no food around anywhere ever. Usually, most of us are not in situations where there's absolutely no food. But that being said, and I will say it again, do the best you can within the situation. If I were coaching her, I would find out exactly what she's talking to me about. But I'm assuming that whatever it is, you just do your best knowing your numbers and make sure that you're eating fuel food. Now, like she said, she just started listening to my podcast and she doesn't want to binge. I think she's pretty funny too, if you didn't notice. She's got some funny things in her letter, like not binging on my podcast, haha, but to listen to it once a week. And I love the idea of listening to it once a week because you practice the exercises each week. So when you're starting with just noting your physical hunger, which is the first thing that I talk about in the first episode, is the physical hunger scale. But also, I'm going to add, I'm putting in a few things, even if you haven't listened to the third and the fourth podcast yet, is that those foods that you decide to eat according to the best you can do with your hunger scale should always be fuel food. In other words, fuel food is considered nutritious food for your body. No matter what, like if you're only a -1 or you notice that you're at a +2, like if you're at a +2, I just wouldn't eat. And I wouldn't scare yourself into thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to eat again. But if the truth of the matter is that there's no way you're going to be able to eat for 3 or 4 hours, do you really want to fill yourself up above that +2? Or why don't you just become curious as to, if you're not hungry when it's time during this break, you know you're not hungry, you're at a +2. Wait and just see what happens. See what happens. Be curious, because even if you get too hungry, you'll still be okay. I don't want you to be afraid of being hungry. I just want you to be aware of how hungry you are or how full you are and not be afraid of it. So that being said, for sure, I would want you to continue listening to these podcasts because you're not at work all day. You have a number of hours where you are on your own and probably not guided by a schedule. You can be guided by your body. So the awareness is number one. And then number two, when you're not on a schedule, then you pay very close attention to what these numbers can be for you, and to be able to identify that -2, and to be able to identify the satisfaction, that light satisfaction of a +2, and not want to go beyond it. So if you're 10 pounds more than you want to be, or 20 pounds more than you want to be, one of the things that you said in your letter is that you think it's due to perimenopause and the pandemic. And this is how I want you to think about it going forward, because the pandemic is something that went on, but what really changed, and that's what I want you to look at with perimenopause and the pandemic, is they didn't make you gain 10 pounds. But the way that you started thinking with either one of those might have been instrumental in helping you gain 10 pounds. So, for instance, whatever happened during the pandemic, what was going on in your mind? Some people say, well, I had more time. Or some people say, well, I had more food around the house. It's really important to look at that, because whatever those things are, it's just your thinking about it that changed the way that you looked at food. It's the same thing with perimenopause and menopause. There is no doubt about either of those that hormonal shifts are going on. Appetites have been changing. As I've stated in many podcasts, is your appetite changes over time. And because of that, if you're not paying attention to your appetite, or you're paying attention instead of your physical appetite, you're paying more attention to your emotional appetite, which could have been the case during the pandemic, is that there were more emotions going on because maybe there was more time going on. Maybe you didn't have that schedule that you were talking about that keeps you from being connected to your body. Well, what about when you're in a situation where you have a lot of time? I would look at that. What happens when I have a lot of time? How do I treat food? What happens when my body is absolutely having hormonal changes and my appetite is changing, but I don't notice that it's changing? Or maybe you've noticed that even though we know metabolism is decreasing, emotions can be increasing. And if you've been one that has fed emotions in the past, if you're anything like me, I would eat emotionally, and I use diets as a way to cut off the emotions and just eat the right food so I could gain that extra 10 pounds that you talk about, so I could lose that extra 10 pounds that I gained. And then as soon as that was off, I was off to the races with food again. I don't know exactly what your history is with this, but just based on what you're telling me, I would look at not so much your schedule. I would do the best you can with that and be very, very aware of your numbers. But what I would look at is when you can see your numbers, and the best way to do that is to get a food journal that you can get from me by going to drdebbutler.com/change, where I have some notes in there about my tools, physical hunger scale, emotional hunger scale, and journals, food journals. And you'll start every time you put food in your mouth. This is all I want you to do for the next week, is put down your physical hunger before and after. If you're in a situation where you feel like you don't have control, and I want to say very clearly, you always have control. Sometimes you're making decisions to eat because of the schedule, and that is your decision. It's not like it's controlling you. You're making a decision to eat the way you want to eat because of the way the schedule is. So you own it and you become more powerful. It's not the schedule itself. It's the way you're deciding to handle it. And I would do it the best I can by staying as close to the twos as I can, and by making sure that when I'm eating, it's fuel food, and that I'm very aware of those numbers. And then on the other hand, for the rest of the time, is I want you to pay attention to if the pandemic somehow caused your mind to change its thinking about food, I would wonder about that. And How is that affecting you now? When do you eat when you're not hungry? Do you notice the times that you eat when you're not hungry? And look at that. And that'll be in your food journal so that if you're putting an entry in and you're eating some food and you know you're at a +2 and you're eating, that's very interesting. And I wouldn't get heavily into it to begin with. I would just write it down and become curious. I always say that when you start food journaling, become curious and not furious. You may not like what you see. It's really easy to pretend like you kind of don't know what's going on by not looking too closely. And since you've used a Fitbit before and you've liked it, I think the food journal is very different in terms of, because I'm not as interested in the way that I set these tools up, not as interested with what you're eating. I'm much more interested in why you're eating and what your physical hunger numbers look like. And I think that if in the next week you start doing the exercise of getting as close as you can, intentionally eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full, and realizing the perimenopause isn't causing anything. Metabolism is down, hormones are shifted, the body is absolutely changing. Is it affecting you in terms of how and when you want to eat? Do you notice that you're emotionally more hungry? Now, how will you know that? You'll know it because you're eating and you're not physically hungry. You don't have to know what the emotion is to begin with. Just know that if you're eating and you know you're at a +2 or above, you're eating when you're not hungry. That's all you need to know. And if you're eating when you're not hungry, something emotionally is going on. Urges, sadness, anger, loneliness. It could be many, many things. I don't even want you to try to figure that out. I just want you to note it. And note that perimenopause isn't causing you to gain anything. It's causing you to become much more aware of your connection to your own body. It begs you to pay attention. There is no doubt about it. And the pandemic, I worked with a lot of people during the pandemic who did great. They started paying more attention. But I also noticed that a lot of people have hired me after the pandemic because they think the pandemic is what caused the problem. The pandemic didn't cause the problem, but your mind changed in the pandemic. And whatever happened there may still be there. Is it? Become curious. I can't wait to hear more from you, my dear listener and writer who also has a sense of humor. And I say, keep listening 1 week at a time. And if you have any other questions or anybody has any other questions about this letter or about what do you do when you have a schedule that may not allow you to eat between the twos and you still have questions, you can also write it to me. But basically, all I'm saying is no matter what situation and you do the very best you can, because I think what happens a lot of times is the brain will go, oh, well, since I can't do that, I might as well just forget about the whole thing. And let's just have Twinkies. I don't even know why I said Twinkies. You know how old I am now. But it's almost like it's an excuse not to pay attention. So if you're in a schedule, I want you to take responsibility for deciding how you're going to eat and listen to your body as best as you can and not feel like you can't, but feel like you're going to do the best you can within the situation and treat food as fuel. Okay, I hope that helps. I can't wait to hear. And of course, I would never end this podcast without saying to you, no matter where you go, or what you do, please, please, please be very, very kind to yourself, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye. If you're loving my podcast and you would like some more information to be able to follow along with, then please go to drdebbutler.com/change, and you can get a free copy of my companion book that goes with this podcast that I refer to in many different episodes. That is drdebbutler.com change. CHANGE.